Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Marathon 2 Durandal, originally for Macintosh, but later released on PC, Linux, and Xbox Live Arcade. This is a first-person shooter by Bungie software and the sequel to the original Marathon. It was released originally for Macintosh in November of 1995, and it got ported to PC the following year, so this is actually the first game in the series to really grace PCs. And like the original game and, of course, Marathon Infinity, it was released by Bungie as a sort of freeware kind of thing. And it was released under the Aleph-1 open source project, which is an open source port of the engine. So that allowed it to move to other systems, and it was actually ported eventually to Xbox Live Arcade in 2007 with updated visuals to go along with it. So what you're actually seeing for the most part in this video is actually the Xbox Live Arcade version graphics, simply because that was implemented in the newer versions of the Aleph-1 project. So you do need to keep that in mind when you're going through this. I will actually have a comparison clip for you, so I do actually have the original visuals version of the Aleph-1 project to go along with this, but just keep in mind that most of the visuals you're going to be seeing here are the updated version. That all said, Marathon 2 was released to quite a bit of acclaim, and that was to be expected after the release of the original game, of course, because it got a pretty similar reception. And this one is interesting not only because it continues what the original did in terms of being one of the first games to have proper dual wielding in it, but it also did things like introduce liquid media that you can actually swim in 3 dimensions. So that's actually a pretty impressive technological feat, especially for a fairly small Mac game. And once again, Mac wasn't really known for gaming and never really has been all that known for gaming. So it's kind of a weird situation where this time around the Mac people didn't really get to lord it over the PC gamers, and the PC gamers actually got a chance to try Marathon 2 out for themselves, because again, it did come to PC. And it's kind of funny, because I don't remember this thing releasing on PC. I've always remembered Marathon as a Mac release, but I've never remembered it as a PC release. And that is simply because when it actually did release on PC, it was kind of a flop. It didn't really do all that well because we had other FPSs out there. Like I said in the Marathon review, we had Doom 2 at the time, we had System Shock, we had other games when this was released in 1996. This was released on PC the same year that the original Quake was. That should tell you something. So this thing had some fairly stiff competition for its place in the FPS market, and it just kind of went under the radar on PC. Mac gamers were all for it, of course, because, again, it's their series, so to speak. But the real question here is, does this thing improve upon the original's absolutely atrocious level design and wonky mechanics to actually become a good game? Or is it just more of the same or something else entirely? Well, as far as the visuals go, I'm showing you a clip right now of the original graphics that this game had. And as you can see, it is straight up better looking than the original Marathon. Some of the sprites were pretty much reused, for example, the aliens. But in general, things did improve. You did have more detail on, for example, the first-person weapons. You had more detail on some of the character sprites. You had more detail in the environments and things like that. And it has some nice features going on in the engine to actually make the visuals fairly appealing for a 2.5D game. Again, going off of the original release of the game in 1995, because, again, by the time it came out in 1996, we just had better looking games out there. So they kind of missed the curve in terms of PC game graphics by that point. But again, it still actually looks pretty good to this day. The graphics have aged very well considering it is a 2D game. Well, 2.5D I should say. And then you have the sound design, which is marginally better than the original game, but not much. It has a bit more action to some of the tracks in terms of its soundtrack than in the previous game, but that's not really saying all that much. And the sound effects are, again, only marginally better than the original game in that the pistols, for example, no longer sound like pea shooters. They actually sound like they're something vaguely resembling powerful. So there's that, but in general, the sound effects just really aren't all that impressive, and the voice acting is basically just reused from the original game. It's still cheesy as hell and only pops up in very specific situations where other security officers pop up, so that's not really saying much, but it is there, and it's nice to have it, I guess. But again, it's not particularly high quality. So at least they did improve the presentation over the original game, and as a result, the game is fairly impressive from a technical standpoint. But obviously what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, and the story in this picks up about 17 years after the events of the original Marathon, and you play as a security officer who is beamed to the this home world of Loan. Okay, Bungie, let me level with you for a second. Throwing a bunch of letters together that make it really hard to pronounce something does not make your name interesting or actually cool. It just makes it annoying to say. Anyway, you find yourself on the home world, and let's just face it, I'm not going to bother trying to pronounce these anymore. I'm just going to say they're the aliens and be done with it, because these names are stupid. But you find yourself on the home world of them with a few ex-colonists, and you are basically doing what Durandal tells you to do. And Durandal has basically wanted to go to this alien home world and attack their world. And so you do that, but it becomes more and more apparent as you go through the game that things are a lot more complex than just wanting to attack the alien homeworld. And in fact, it gets to the point where it's actually pretty hard to follow what exactly is going on. Not because it's intelligently complex, but because it feels complex for the sake of being complex. Like, Bungie were so incredibly wrapped up with trying to go all out on making a ridiculously convoluted plot that they completely lost sight of what they were actually going for, and they pretty much lose the player very, very quickly. Now, there are some of you out there, I'm sure, who will be like, well, DW, the story in these games is amazing, or something like that. But no, it isn't. If you lose interest within the first couple of levels, there's something horribly wrong, okay? Complexity does not make a story good. That said, there are a few interesting ideas in it, and it does deal with the whole AI thing in a fairly interesting manner. But again, the story just loses you, and you only get bits and pieces of it as you're going through. It's still told in the exact same way, which is through terminals. So you're going to be doing a lot of reading, and there's going to be a lot of jargon thrown at you. So you basically need a jargon encyclopedia to try to actually understand what's going on half the time. And ultimately, it becomes less about the plot and more about the gameplay, which is exactly the same as the original Marathon. The difference being that they added a couple of things. They added a new weapon, the shotgun, which, yes, shotguns are really cool, and in this particular case, it's a lever-action double-barrel shotgun that has an action that is apparently described as so complex that you wouldn't understand it, which is another way of saying bullshit. Bullshit. And they can be dual-wielded, so that's pretty cool. But other than that, it's basically the exact same gameplay as Marathon 1, just with another weapon and swimming. So you now have swimming areas that you can go through, and it does have some 3D swimming. So that's a thing. It's not very good swimming. It feels kind of clunky and awkward, just as the movement in the original game did. But in this particular case, it's a cool technical achievement. And then there's the one thing that, once again, kills this game. Once again, the level design in this game is downright atrocious. If anything, it's actually worse than the original Marathon. I don't know how they managed that, but they somehow made the level design worse. It's more convoluted. There's more circling in and around itself and just getting lost in these levels, having basically no idea what you did to screw up or what you missed in any given spot, because you just happen to not see the exact same looking corridor that you weren't going down, and it looked like one you had been down already, and things like that. It wasn't fun in the original Marathon, and it's not fun here. Again, it's infuriating to deal with. No amount of adding shotguns or adding swimming or adding any ridiculous amounts of complex narrative is going to save the game from its downright horrible level design. It's bad enough that we've got movement that feels awkward in a way that is hard to describe and really has to be felt, although it is very, very slightly better than the original Marathon. I will give them that. It's very slightly smoother, but that's not saying much. The original Marathon's movement was just really awkward, floaty nonsense that felt like you had no precision. This one feels like you have a bit more precision, but it still feels floaty and awkward. So at least they made some very slight improvements here and there, but once again, it just falls into the exact same pits that the original game did, even with these slight improvements. And it makes a really poor first impression when, on the very first level, you have to find a secret door to actually progress. I would have thought they would have learned their lesson from the atrocious level design in the original Marathon, but they didn't, and if anything, it seems like they actually regressed. So what you end up with here is a complete mess of a first-person shooter. It's not fun to play. It's interesting from a historical standpoint, again, but once again, it's just not a fun game. A lot of people would probably swear by the multiplayer, but once again, most people who are playing Marathon's multiplayer are playing Marathon Infinity, not this. It does expand upon the multiplayer of the original game. I will give them that. It expands on quite a bit, actually. But I still haven't played it. And once again, with mechanics this awkward feeling, I can't imagine it being all that fun. I'll still have a link in the video description box to where you can take a look at this if you're interested, but I really don't recommend playing this except for a historical standpoint. Thanks for watching.